What's up, guys? We are at the 8th Lit Podcast, Last Inning Touchdown. I'm here with my boy Logan, where we discuss baseball, football, Overwatch League. We do it all here. We are the Elite Podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor.fm/Last Inning TD. Also on Twitter, Last Inning TD. What's up, Logan? How you doing tonight?
You know, I'm doing good, man. Doing good.
That's what I like to hear.
I'm fully recovered from COVID, man. Fully recovered.
Hey, no, I don't think any of our viewers or listeners got it, so through you, so you're good.
That's probably true, yeah.
They were able to social distance away from you. No problem. I got a little bit of a mess behind me, so we did a little photo shoot with the daughter for her first Christmas in our basement down here, so there's some of the remnants laying on the floor behind me. So it's
I have two dogs. You can see one of them's snout right there.
It's his little snoot.
Right there.
Little snooter. All right. So, Major League Baseball. So I know right before we hit the live button, you did say it was a little bit of a slow time period right now for MLB. The Rangers signed Rafael Montero. Red Sox signed Hunter Renfroe. The Rangers signed David Dahl. And I guess the biggest of the signings would be the Mets signing James McCann. That's an interesting one because the Mets were really highly talked about as getting JT Realmuto, but it seems they've already pivoted and said we want a deal done now. And I don't know what JT Realmuto's asking for, but I mean, it seems like if you were going to get top dollar as Realmuto, the Mets were the ones who were going to give it to you. And now I wonder if he's going to be settling the rest of this offseason now.
I have a massive expectation that man's going to settle for probably like $50 million less. Apparently he wants like $200 million. And that seems excessive for really any catcher.
Do you think, and we've seen it a little bit more in these more recent years, do you think Realmuto bets on himself and takes a 1-year deal? And then plays his little heart out and then tries again next year, hoping that this is a full season and the market's a little bit more interesting?
I'm going to say no, because if you're still going to sign for $120 million, like, you're still happy. I just think he wants something like $200 million, and I would not ever in my life risk. Like, yes, I could make an extra like $40 million, but will I ever really need that extra $40 million? Probably not. So I don't know. I think it would just be smart to take the money. I'm always the guy who says it's smart to take the money.
Well, see, it's also interesting because I know, like, in major leagues, I mean, you could realistically argue that most of them, once they get in the millions of dollars, like, the difference in money really doesn't matter. But what's interesting though is I would imagine that there's kind of a status thing. You know, I mean, I can't imagine. There's no way Realmuto signs for less than, you know, James McCann did. Like, there's no way he's going to settle that far. But I also tend to agree with you. I think that it's smart to take the money because in a position like catcher, you know, what if something happens next year and he can't play catcher for 3/4 of the year, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, is he really a catcher anymore going into the offseason? And then that really hurts your value because it's like, yeah, JT Realmuto's a stud, but if you play JT Realmuto at first base now, his stats aren't as interesting. Like, he's still good, but he's not, you know, top 3. He's not top 3 at his position anymore, you know?
And then, and then he'd be 30. So then if you miss let's say, like, you're right, he did, like, let's say he gets hurt in spring training, misses a full year, he's going to be 30. So, like, you have, like, those, you just have the bad numbers, you know, in line. And I understand, like you said, going to the millions is whatever, but, you know, once you, and like, it's all about status. But my thing is like, if you can hit like a certain number in life, especially as a player, where you can hit like, you know, $30 or $40 million earned, just total through a career. I mean, you set up like every generation you can think of, and anyone can really have whatever they want. Like, you make $1 million playing baseball, like, yeah, you're set for a little bit, but I can tell you, we're all going to spend. Most people in life are going to spend a lot of money, and it's going to be closer to $1 million than people think. Because
I think it's a lot closer to $1 million than people think.
I agree.
I mean, after like 10 years, as a family, you easily would spend $1 million.
Exactly.
But I do think I think the big key to a lot of professional athletes in general, a wise man being my father always tells me, it's never about how much you make, it's about how much you spend. And I think there's a lot of athletes that do find themselves in trouble, that they're really living the lifestyle, and then when their sport disappears from them, all of a sudden got a lot of people wanting their money still.
You're seeing a lot less and less of those stories though, now that it's becoming more prominent for these young guys to hire financial advisors really young and stuff like
Right,
that. Like,
right. It's kind of a given now. Like, and I
like
think
that's
a lot of
what
times,
you do. Like,
a lot of times
what
now,
you do.
instead of just having an agent, you got a whole team. Like, you got a whole team of people saying you're going to be set for life because we're going to do this stuff for you.
Yeah, we're going to do this, and this, and we're not going to fuck it up, mess it up. Sorry.
So, unrelated to off season, kind of a big news in baseball world today was that the Negro Leagues has officially been added to the record books as official records, as if it's Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it's interesting. I mean, it's always been, we're younger guys comparatively speaking, not super young anymore, but we're still less than 30. But we grew up, you always knew, like, oh yeah, the Negro Leagues had really good players, but they, it didn't really count because they weren't in the major leagues. Like, that was kind of always that mindset of, well, you never really know how good they were because they weren't in the major leagues. And there's always been the people that have argued, well, the Negro Leagues might have been better than the major leagues. It just wasn't as, well documented and things like that. But so I think this is a big step. I mean, it's going to change the perception of how, moving forward. You're going to have these generations right now that kind of know both sides, like before and after they were added, but you're eventually going to get to where there's kids that when they look at baseball history, like, for them it's both going to be there at all times. Like, they're going to compare stats and historical events of both sides all the time, not realizing there was really a time when we didn't look at them as equal. It's pretty cool. I think it's interesting. And then I see all these social media debates as well about now who is the best hitter of all time, and Ted Williams isn't the most recent person to hit 400 anymore, and there's a whole bunch of things that have kind of changed, and I'm definitely for it. I think that I definitely think that it makes it more interesting, because it's like, look at all the players that when they were allowed in society to come play Major League Baseball, jumped into the sport and were top tier talent. And it's like, man, you've got years and years and years of that, those stats and that history not being recorded as official just because they weren't a part of Major League Baseball at the time. I think it's a cool step, and I think it's definitely really good for the sport.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, just like you said, it's like you never really know who the best players were when you were separating the leagues, right? And so it's like you said, you could never really tell. Just because one was called the Major Leagues and one was called the Negro Leagues doesn't mean that the Negro Leagues didn't have better overall competition. You just never really knew. So, and there were the two pro leagues, and it makes sense to put them, right alongside the record books, because people always argue about, old school records because of how guys used to pitch every day. So like the innings records are hard to beat and stuff like that, or impossible now. And so there's really no point if you're going to keep one of them not to keep all of them, right? So,
and I think it's also interesting too, because now you got guys like Jackie Robinson and like that played in both, and now both league stats are going to become official stats for them. It's not just what they did in the major leagues anymore. And then, what's interesting though is that instantly makes me then think about like a guy like Ichiro, who came over and had a Hall of Fame career after having a Hall of Fame career. It's like crazy. And how many people, are we unaware of that, kind of would have had something similar with the Negro Leagues if it was available to them? Like, how many of those guys were Hall of Famers for the Negro Leagues and could have easily came over and then just become Hall of Famers for Major League Baseball too?
Yeah, just dominated Major League Baseball. Yeah,
I'm very interested to learn more about it, because I do feel like when they were separated, there was no like, I don't want to say, I don't know any other way to word it except there was no reason to know those stats. Like, they didn't give you, when it's kind of like knowing someone's minor league stats. Like, that's how they made it appear for the longest time. Like, yeah, it was there, but it didn't really count. And now it's like, man, I kind of want to dig into it and see how many of these guys are even better than we thought now that we add these other years to their statistics.
I'm really bad. I'm a really bad historian when it comes to baseball. Like I definitely know, obviously the big stats and stuff like that, but
Right.
so I'm definitely the wrong guy about that anyway, because I'm not really the biggest historian. I'm more of the now.
Well, I
And
definitely
it's
feel
not
that.
just with baseball; it's with every sport. So I'm not like because generations change, talent changes. You know, the overall ability of players change, the overall focus on how to do things changes. You know, like things that we were doing in high school were things that people didn't even know to do back then. So I don't know. I've always been a really poor historian, and that's on me. But it's exciting to put them all in the record books because if they were both professional leagues and there's no point separating them, and just it's you know
Yeah,
it
and
makes sense. It
I,
makes sense in my opinion.
and I
So
definitely feel that comment that you're saying too, though, because it's like, on the other side of it, it's like think about all the players that we watched growing up that have disappeared now in baseball time, like because they're not Hall of Famers, they're not, they were great players and we loved watching them grow up. But then all of a sudden you hear the name and you're just like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. It's like, so I definitely understand. I mean, there's just so much history. It's really hard to be a true historian for
I mean, the
a
Cardinals
sport.
built a team full of in the mid 2000s, full of just near Hall of Famers, but only one really or two true Hall of Famers. With when you had guys, in the mid 2000s of Edmonds, Roland, Pujols, Holiday, Chris Carpenter, Adam Wainwright, Yadier Molina. It's like only two of those guys are going to make it.
But it's like those guys were huge. Those guys were huge for
Exactly.
us
Like
growing up.
everybody playing baseball or who watched baseball knew the 2, 3, 4 of the Cardinals of Edmonds, Pujols, and Roland in the mid 2000s. They're the scariest.
Which is crazy
2, 3,
because
4.
that doesn't even count like Renteria, who was a huge name here.
Oh yeah.
I mean, guys like that. I mean, it's just interesting that those players
Fernando
just,
Vina.
they just disappear in baseball time. They're gone, and we'll remember
really
them.
solid.
We'll
player.
remember them for a little while, and eventually you're gonna forget about them, and then you'll hear their
I'll
name
remember
randomly.
them.
You'll
I'll
hear
remember
their
them
name
because of,
randomly, and you're like, oh yeah, those guys.
I'll remember them because the Cardinals Hall of Fame has now
Right.
become a thing because they didn't have it for so long, and now they do. So they have votes for recently retired players and players of the deep past, and
I think the Cardinals do a really good job with that too, because I know that their
the red jacket.
organization, they make a big deal out of it, but they also do an awesome job of keeping those guys around. And they're involved with the team. They're creating that culture in the young players. They're showing them and teaching them the history of what it means to be on a Cardinals team. I think that they do a really good job at keeping those people around. And
I agree.
Really influencing their generations.
I agree. The family aspect of having guys like Gibson around for so long that he was even talking to Flaherty, and Flaherty's trying to learn that mindset that everyone knew that Gibson had, right? Because that's pretty much what he was. He was just a guy with a crazy mindset. And you have guys like Willie McGee, the fastest player and the guy who stole more bases than anyone could even imagine, is still around teaching the Cardinals in a sport that no longer runs. The Cardinals run way more than anybody else that I know. I mean, I don't know about way more, but I know they run just as much as anybody else in baseball now. Schilt likes to run with anybody. Jose Martinez stole, I think, 10 bases for the Cardinals 2 years ago. And they just run like crazy. And then Jose Oquendo's been, with the organization forever. I mean, they've just had, the guys that, were players stay around to coach and teach these guys. And it's just a nice, seems like really family.
Well, it's interesting. It is interesting that you mentioned the Jose Martinez stolen bases thing. It reminds me, like Pujols was not fast. But if you look at his stats, he always sneakily stole like 10 bases in his seat. Like every year he was stealing. Though. But I mean, it was still there though. Like the Cardinals have always, except really the Matheny era, they've always been an aggressive, smart base running team.
Well, Pujols was known and still is, even though he's way older now, but so it's not as prevalent. But they did like a thing a couple of years ago on like who's like the best slow base runner, and like half the league said Pujols because. Just because he's one of those guys that people forget about. He's sneaky, and it's really all about your jumps. I mean, anybody can steal a base if you get a good jump. That's just how jumps are massive. Obviously, in the pros, everything means everything because the guy trying to throw you out is the best in the world. But but jumps are really all it is. And like I said, like in the pros, obviously everything matters. But even when you're younger, you learn like like if you get that quick first step. Especially with young catchers who are just terrible at the sport when you're in like high school and college, stuff like that. They can't handle people that have quick first steps. And that's why guys like Trey Turner stole 55 bases, which was more than like every team besides 2 in his college years.
Right.
Random stat, yeah. His freshman year, he stole more bases than every team besides 2 by himself. And then he got thrown out stealing home against North Carolina, and he was safe by 5 feet, but college refs, lulls, umps.
Something.
It was rough. It's hilarious. You should see it.
So there's a off-season name that I've heard flying around here lately that I think is kind of interesting. Good old Jackie Bradley Jr. is on the trade block, and I feel like he's one of those guys that kind of could fit on just about any team. I mean, he's a solid all-around player. And I'm just interested. I'm trying to think of where do I think Jackie Bradley Jr. is going to end up this year. I think that the first step is, what does Boston want for Jackie Bradley Jr.? But who do you see as players for Jackie Bradley Jr.? I'm kind of curious. I'm trying to think here. Where do I think Jackie Bradley Jr. could end up? I could see him for some reason the Cubs and the Phillies are standing out to me in my head, like real fast here.
Cubs and Phillies stand out to be actual players. Cardinals could be players, and like if he goes like all the way to the trade deadline, because the Cardinals are a team that's going to be around and they're going to be good, but we don't know how our outfield's going to be because we're going to be stuck with Fowler, Bader, and Carlson and O'Neill. And I'm not saying I don't believe in those guys. I actually have a good amount of faith after how Fowler's played the last couple of years, and a guy like Bader and Carlson's end of the year. But if any of those guys really underperform, I can see the Cardinals trying to do something if they're close. Phillies are always players, especially after they just signed the new guy to be the president of baseball.
Well, and so that's
GM. And
the interesting thing about that too.
You're right. JBJ could be on any team.
So, but with the Cubs and the Phillies, both front offices have experience with Boston, so they truly understand the value. They understand the value of Jackie Bradley, though, is what I'm getting at here. Is they've been there recently, so they probably like the guy to begin with, and I think that both teams are gonna need, something filled there. I would imagine that the Phillies didn't sell, and now we're both blanking on that guy's name. The guy the Phillies signed as their GM. You didn't sign him and say, hey, you know what? Why don't you come on in and we're going to just sit here with Bryce Harper and not make any moves. Like, we don't want you to actually do anything. We just want you to have Bryce Harper. I think that he's going to want to make some moves, and I think that he's going to know exactly what it takes to get Jackie Bradley Jr. The question will be, is he willing to give it up? I wouldn't be surprised as well over there in the Cubs. They're losing Schwarber.
Dombrowski.
Yes. And they've got some shaky question marks all over the place. So a solid player like Jackie Bradley Jr. wouldn't surprise me.
He'd also be actually probably better for the team than Schwarber. Put him next to put Hayward in right and him in center. Like that's.
And it seems like lately the Cubs have enough people batting 200 and not fielding their positions, so they definitely could use a kind of professional baseball player there.
You're right. Jack Bradley Jr. is a guy that you can just picture in a uniform. You put him in Oakland, you put him at wherever, you could see him being
he's just a
contributor for any team. And regardless of that team, he's a guy who needs to be in the postseason. Just because he's built for it. He's built to steal a base. He's built to throw a guy out at home. He's built for it. So
absolutely,
like that just seems like he might not be the best baseball player, but he's one of those guys that just seems like he's built for that postseason run. That he's going to be the guy to make a game-changing play in like a game 7 or something, and then you go from there. Like that just seems who Jackie Bradley Jr. is because of his skill set. Doesn't mean obviously it will, but.
Yeah,
guys with like those big skill sets.
So it's also interesting with mentioning Jackie Bradley Jr. possibly to the Phillies. All of my other off-season rumors, conversations have to do with the NL East as well. And the more I hear about this, the more it actually makes me okay with the Marlins kind of waiting while their players develop. Because it's like if the Marlins go all in and kind of stunt the growth of some of these players to try and go all in, you're an entire division of teams that's going all in right now, and only so many people can make it. Like, only so many teams from one division that are playing each other all the time can truly be successful. And so it's almost, you kind of like, it makes me okay with kind of sitting back, let your guys develop, give it a couple years. Maybe these teams are going to, because in baseball, there is a lot of this, we're going to buy a team and then a couple years later have to sell the team because we're not very good. And, so I'm okay with the Marlins kind of sitting back, not doing much, because the other things I'm hearing, there's a lot of talks that George Springer will be a Met. A lot of conversation around George Springer being a Met. And now the most recent rumor I'm hearing about the Mets is that the Mets could be the quiet suitor for an Arenado trade. So that's another interesting one. If the Mets could pull off Springer and Arenado, I mean, if you're DeGrom, you're sitting there going, maybe I won't keep losing 1-0 games. You got to think, he's like sitting there like, man, I could have a sub-2 ERA and a winning record. If I'm him, I am contacting the front office saying whatever it takes right here. I need these guys. I know we're not 100% buyers on what Arenado is going to be outside of Colorado, but I mean, if you're going all in, that's a guy I don't mind having. I don't mind taking that chance.
Yeah, Arenado's the guy. It would be weird to see Arenado go from the NL West and Coors Field to the NL East, which has big and small ballparks, but he'd be playing 81 at like the biggest stadium in the world, right? And that would be pretty crazy to see him play in New York for the Mets, because
it would really give him a chance to quiet all the haters saying that he's a Coors Field only kind of guy. If he could come through and be successful in New York in front of the spotlight, then it's kind of like, okay, well, he didn't need Coors Field. Yeah, it may have helped him some, because you can't deny that Coors Field is a hitter's park, but
yeah, I
mean, some people basically are making it seem like he's one of those guys that if he left, he'd be terrible. And I think, unfortunately for him, too, I think, unfortunately for Arenado, he's at that stage in his career, too, where his numbers are going to decline anyways. And so if he leaves Colorado, everyone's going to be like, oh, Colorado's the only reason. And look at how bad he's getting. It's like, well, dude, he's also getting older. Like,
But one thing that Arenado's got to think about is he has to leave Coors Field.
If he ever wants to win.
Yes, but if he wants to be in the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame voters hate players that play in Colorado. They do. They absolutely do. But you also, man,
but how do you deny how? I mean, Coors Field didn't make him the greatest third baseman of all time. Basically, I mean, that guy makes plays that are absolutely insane.
But you're not going to put a guy in the Hall of Fame for his defense. Ask Omar Vizquel, right? So,
well, Omar Vizquel also beats his wife. So
yeah, but we're not. but what I'm saying is
allegedly.
Yeah, well, clearly the White Sox fight him for a reason. But yeah, Omar Vizquel has a lot of outside problems, which Hall of Fame does take character into play. Some people I don't believe know that Hall of Fame takes character into play. Obviously, no matter how good you are, like, you're still going to get in if you're good enough, even if your character is bad. But Omar Vizquel is one of those guys that is arguably the greatest defensive player of all time.
But could you argue that, yes, Coors Field's made him better, but yet his stats were still pretty solid offensively, and he was the greatest fielder of all time? Because Omar Vizquel was very lacking a lot of times in that offensive department, and he played in a time period that was like all steroids and offense, and that's when he was really
he played for 24 years.
He did play for freaking ever, but
no, I'm not taking anything away from Arenado. I mean, I think
Arenado is
Arenado.
I think regardless of what happens with the rest of his career, he will be a very interesting guy to talk about when it comes retirement and that Hall of Fame talk. Obviously, if he dies and never plays another game, then maybe not. But I think it'll be interesting when we get to that conversation with him, because he is arguably the greatest third baseman of all time. So then how much
defensively? So you keep stating that, but he means defensively, not baseman, defensive third baseman.
And so then, how much are we going to take away his offense due to Coors Field? Speaking of greatest defensive players of all time, it came out today, or not today. I don't know why I said today. I read it today, that Marcel Ozuna has claimed he is an outfielder, not a DH, and that he is prepared to play outfield somewhere, and that basically he is saying that it was an adjustment to play corner outfields and he's learned from it and blah 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 blah. He's saying he's an everyday left fielder. He'll be okay out there. And I'm hearing the Nationals are interested. So,
well, any team should be interested regardless because you can live with 1 year because the NL is going to go to the DH most likely in 2021.
I really thought they were going this year.
Anyway, so regardless of what you're going to have, you're only going to have 1 year. You said all 4 teams in the NL East are diving right in. I think there's 3 teams that are diving right in. I think the Nationals are still trying to feel the market and feel everything like. But I think want to make a play.
But
we have some good pitching in Juan Soto and Trey Turner, but how big of a splash do we really want to make?
I think the Nationals already kind of made their. They have a World Series team that's only a year removed. You got to think that they're still ready to win.
To be fair, they lost their by far best player.
Well, they did.
Now Juan Soto has jumped into the superstar category that he wasn't there yet. But Rendon was obviously a freak.
Right.
And he was last year.
I just think that it's hard to say that they're, last year I think was a fluke for them. And I think they played a lot better at the end of the season. It was just, the season was over.
Well, get this straight. If the Nationals in 2019 would have played this year, they were 19-31, 50 games deep in 2019. Right. They were like arguably the worst team in baseball, and everyone was saying sell, 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 and everyone in St. Louis was saying, all right, Cardinals buy all their players, which the Cardinals just don't do anything. And then all of a sudden they were like, we're going to fire our pitching coach and then win a World Series. So
yeah, I just think it's hard to say that the Nationals
so
aren't
hard to judge.
It's hard to honestly, it's hard to say that the Phillies are all in and the Nationals aren't. To me, the Nationals are closer to being a playoff team than the Phillies are.
Yeah,
but
and then
I think the Phillies are making moves to try and still be good because you signed that big contract with Bryce Harper. You're not going to just say, you know what, whatever, we'll just let it ride now. Like you don't do that. Yeah. It's kind of like the Angels with that Angels.
I'm going to go over here. You're even the agreeer on the 60-game season. It was it's like impossible to do it because you were like. You said that you didn't even believe your Marlins were going to be a playoff team if they played a full season because they were going to tucker out, which I think a lot of people agree with because they were so young. But I think that was a good experience last year.
And that's what baseball history
Phillies,
tells you.
You just don't even know. We just don't even know what the Phillies are. They say they're going to be all in, and I wouldn't say they're not all in yet because they have spent a lot of money. But they can easily go out and just sign one more guy or just 2 more guys, and I'd consider them fully all in because they are spending just so much on one guy.
Right. I don't know that necessarily right now their financials say, we're all in because they do only have the one guy. But I think the mindset there in Philadelphia is we want to win now. It's a we're winning now mindset. It isn't we're developing players. It's not we're rebuilding. It's we want to win now. They just may not be making the huge splash. And I think that 4 of the 5 teams have that mindset of we're ready to win now. The Marlins are, they're on the cuffs. They're saying, we want to win now. But we want to develop these guys that we got too. We don't want to clog up. We don't want to sign a 29-year-old to a 3-year deal and then all of a sudden our 23-year-old in the minor leagues never gets a chance to play. And next thing you know, he's 26 when he finally gets up, and it's that they're not trying to do that. They're trying to see what they truly have in a full season and then make a move, which I'm not against. I think that the Marlins will be bigger players come the deadline if they're successful. If their team is successful, then the deadline shows up, then they might say, okay, we do have the pieces to win now. We've shown it this far into the season. We showed it last year. But I think that right now they're probably in the same mindset as we are is, we did it during 60 games, but could we maintain it? And they're going to want to see it happen before they, go all in. They don't want to go all in and spend all this money like they did when they made the wonky changes and signed every free agent, Jose Reyes, freaking, everybody they signed. And then next thing you know, the whole team flops and it didn't work out. They want to see what they've got first and then make their play.
I'm really intrigued by Oakland. Oakland lost a lot of important pieces. And are they going to sign these guys back? Or are they going
Oakland is always an interesting yet not interesting team.
Because Tommy La Stella is a free agent after they traded him to Anaheim. Liam Hendricks is a free agent. Marcus Semion's a free agent. Mike Fiers is a free agent. Yusmeiro Petit is a free agent.
I'd be surprised if they sign any of these guys.
It's just crazy. That's just a lot of guys they're losing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think isn't Seattle using a 6-man rotation this year?
All I know
I
is
think
the
that's
Cardinals traded Marcus Gonzales for Tyler O'Neill, and I'm still hoping that works out for us because it seems to really work out for Seattle. The Cardinals are the pros at making trades for the really big guys that work out incredibly well, so that's a really good like reputation to have. You know, we traded for Matt Holliday and didn't really lose like we lost Dan Herron, but Dan Herron was that like it didn't matter. And then they traded for Goldie, and that's worked out because Luke Weaver is absolutely garbage and Carson Kelly is not impressive, and that's really all they gave up for him. What?
They got Mark Mulder. Oh, wait, never mind.
Yeah.
He was terrible.
He was terrible. His arm died the second he got traded to St. Louis, so that sucks. But I mean, but that's still, you know, I'd take 2 out of 3 in those.
Right, I know. And I had to give you a little trouble there.
But they tend to do well in the big trades. You know what they do horrible in is in the small trades where they just trade Cleveland all their good prospects and get nothing in return. Or we trade a guy like a guy who made his MLB debut at 20 for St. Louis and Gonzales. Trade him to Seattle. He becomes the ace of Seattle. Led the MLB in wins last year, I think. Tied for 1st and 8th in Seattle.
I liked him a lot.
And we traded him for Tyler O'Neill, who's older, but he was their top prospect.
Now,
overall.
Marco Gonzales was one of those guys that struggled with injuries with the Cardinals. He wasn't really living up to any kind of.
Well, that was the thing is he came out in his rookie year in like 2015 and pitched incredibly well, and then walked into a postseason and they put him in high leverage situations in a postseason against his arch rival Cubs, and he pitched really well. And then we traded him, and then he had an injury riddled 21-year-old season where he didn't even touch the pros. And then we traded him that offseason. And it's like, I'm confused what we're trying to do here with him because it's a lefty. I mean, he might be overrated, but Tyler O'Neill just batted 170. He won a Gold Glove, but he just batted 170.
It makes me wonder.
It just sucks to see that happen.
That's why
I'm really fearful trading Nolan Gorman for Nolan Arenado. It just scares me.
It makes me wonder if the Cardinals at the time saw something with Marco Gonzalez's injury that made him almost like when the Chargers traded Drew Brees. You know, they kind of looked at that injury and they said, you know, I don't even know if he's going to ever bounce back from this. You know, what can we get for him kind of deal, you know?
Oh, we got a top 5 pick.
Right. Well, I'm saying, you know, what can we do with him though? You know, like it's kind of one of those. It's one of those. I'm not trading the trade. Yeah, not the trade exactly, but I mean, you went and got a guy that the Cardinals at the time liked, and you know, you traded a guy who was good for you, but spent an entire year hurt with an issue that tends to linger with pitchers. I mean, once your shoulder and stuff gets messed up, it very rarely ever goes back to normal. I mean, the shoulder's nuts. I mean, it's like, you know, nothing in your shoulder ever works again if you mess it up too bad.
Just as the Cardinals have been the king of trading.
I think both of us can speak to that in our livelihood.
Dude, my freaking arm. But it just sucks because the Cardinals have been. I mean, the Cardinals.
But so wouldn't you say that the Arenado trade, though, would work out well for the Cardinals because Arenado is the big name and they usually do well in that trade? Which you could argue then is why the Cardinals haven't pulled the trigger on that trade, is because maybe this one wasn't going to work out because, you know, it is what it is.
The Cardinals and Rockies, at this point, there's no way in hell they were ever going to make the trade. The Cardinals had the pieces to make the trade, and they've just decided not to do it. I have no faith that Nolan Arenado is going to walk into St. Louis and be even a factor offensively. I think he is not going to be anything impressive at all offensively in St. Louis.
So
I've been pretty much since day one a pretty big hater on the Nolan Arenado. The only time I really wanted on Nolan Arenado is when it was like the deal was going to be made like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
or 4 years ago. That's when I was
right before the contract was signed, when the Cardinals were debating whether or not they wanted to take the risk of if he'd stay or not. That was when the deal made the most sense.
That's when I was like, do it now, and we'll figure it out, and then we can see if he can hit in St. Louis and hit in a lineup that's doesn't have as much offensive power or just overall protection as the Rockies. And that's when I wanted him. Now I don't want him at all. I have zero faith that Nolan Arenado will walk into St. Louis and be good. He will walk in to be the best third baseman in the MLB still defensively. I mean, I just don't think, and I think he'll be good. He just won't be worth $27 million a year, whatever he's making, you know? Right. And I mean, we already have one player who's doing that. I mean, we have Goldie who's doing that, who cool, he hit 300, but I'm not paying you to hit, $26 million a year to hit 6 home runs. Okay. That's not okay.
Right.
In my opinion, like, okay, well, It was only 2 months. Well, he could have got. I mean, we're a playoff baseball team, and look, I mean, I understand that the rest of the lineup was so bad, and that's why. So, like, I still love Goldie, and I have all the faith that he'll be solid, especially with a guy like Carlson, hopefully being in the lineup and being good. But a guy like Goldie last year didn't have to do didn't even have the chance to do anything because they walked him. If you I know you probably didn't pay attention as much as I did, as I'm a Cardinals fan, but that guy had a 500 on base into September.
Well, and I think that's where the
because
Cardinals
they didn't pitch to him; they just walked him.
I mean, to me, Goldschmidt is now playing the exact role that they asked Ozuna to play. Is this, I'm going to make you the entire heart of our order is you, and you're either going to walk or swing at junk. Now, Goldie is a little bit better at taking the walk, where Ozuna was like, all right, I'm swinging away. Like, I'm going to hit my 30 home runs this year. I don't care what I have to do it. You know, but I mean, I think that's what the Cardinals have really done a disservice to these guys that they're bringing in is, you know, you're asking one player to carry your offensive load while the rest of your team is so streaky and so struggling.
Which is hilarious because when they proved that they were the best team in the world on a repeated, or arguably the best team in the world on a repeated basis, all they had was just more power than you could believe. I mean, there was one year that Pujols, Edmonds, and Roland finished second, third, and fourth in the MVP. 3 guys off one team finished second, third, and fourth in the MVP.
Right.
That is bonkers. It's not even possible to happen.
Bonkers.
It's not even possible to happen. And so they gave a guy like Pujols, who was to be fair, the greatest hitter, the greatest 11 years in baseball history. They gave him more protection you could ever even imagine with guys like Roland, Edmonds, and Holiday. And then you give a guy like Goldschmidt, and you go, okay, we're going to bat Brad Miller behind you. That was literally our 4-hitter for the most games last year was Brad Miller, who did lead the club in home runs, surprisingly.
But I think that Brad Miller is your classic example of, for whatever reason, baseball's always had this mindset that, like, when you are not a established major leaguer, we're going to throw you fastballs down the middle. And I've never really understood that mindset.
Well, Brad Miller is an established major leaguer, though.
He's an established minor leaguer, but you know, it is what it is. But I think that there's always that weird struggle in Major League Baseball when the players that have not been seen as much, they like to just throw these, I'm going to challenge you fastball. See if you can hit my fastball. And it's like, dude, at this point, everyone can hit a fastball. Like, baseball is 99% fastball. You know, and so I don't know. It's just interesting. The other thing, speaking of teams that have done really well in trades, kind of the opposite of what we were talking about before, the Tampa Bay Rays are the finesse kings of trades. They constantly trade their best pitcher to someone for amazing prospects. That best pitcher's terrible for the other people. And then all those prospects develop, it seems like. And obviously we know Blake Snell is on the market. So I've come up with exactly how I would handle the Blake Snell market if I was a GM. I think this is the smartest thing you could do. I would call up the Rays and I would say, you can have anyone in my farm system. Who do you want? As soon as they answer it, I hang up the phone and I go right to those players and sign them. I extend all of those players that they just told me because the Rays hit every single time on those guys they trade. Cute. That is what I would do. I would go, you can have anybody you want for Blake Snell. And as soon as he tells me who he wants, I hang up the phone and I say, hey, let's extend all of these guys.
Yeah, we're just going to give this guy a $50 million contract. Like, the dude's in Double-A. He's going to make it, dude. I promise. The Rays said he's good.
The Rays wanted him. And everyone's just like, oh.
And then the Cardinals made a trade with the Rays last offseason. Do you know what that trade was?
Tommy Pham.
No, that was a couple of years ago. Randy Razorina and Jose Martinez to the Tampa Bay Rays. Do you know who was traded for?
Yeah, that pitcher, dude.
Matthew Liberatore.
Yeah. So they were making fun of on MLB Network. What's his name? Totally
Randy.
No, they were making fun of one of the hosts on MLB Network because he pronounced Arozarena wrong. And so basically by making fun of him, they said someone had tweeted at the show saying that next year the Rays were renaming Tropicana. They were going to call it the Razorina because that was very similar to how he mispronounced his name. So they were going to call it the Razorina.
Razorina. That's fun. That dude had
The Randy Razorina.
That guy had a pretty good postseason, I'd say.
He did, absolutely.
You know what's really funny? And this is going to be kind of an idiotic story. So I always joke when a young player on a team who, works their way through the minor league system and they're in their like mid-20s makes a mistake. I just say they just need to start over somewhere else. And in 2019, when the Cardinals were fighting for a division win, a Razorina going for a walk-off win tripped halfway down the third base line and got tagged out, and the Cardinals lost it in the 10th. And I go, Cardinals need to trade this guy. They just need to trade him and get him out of here. He played in the minor leagues for 8 years for us. Gets his chance and falls down. They didn't trade him, and then he becomes a sweetheart of the Tampa Bay Rays. They build him up. They bat him third because I don't know what they're doing, and then it works.
It's the Rays.
And then it works because they batted him third. And he just roasts every pitch because, just like you said, no one's faced this guy. I'm just going to throw him bell-type fastballs and say, can you hit me? And he said, yeah, I'm going to hit 400 and hit 9 postseason home runs. And then people are going to say, oh, it's because the Rays played more games. But they didn't. When he broke a lot of David Freese's records and he played just as many, they played like an equal amount of games. So
I was very proud of myself. MLB Network, they did a trivia question from 2020, and I knew the answer to it.
Come on, baby.
I am 99% sure you know the answer to this as well. It's actually pretty obvious.
Oh no!
If you already you either have seen this and already know it.
Oh no!
Or you may not. So it basically the trivia question was, who was the only MLB player to play more than 60 games last year?
Only one player played more than 60 games last year?
Yes.
Oh shit. Played more than 60 games. Only one that in the regular season?
In the regular season.
In the what?
In the regular season.
Oh no.
Only one player. Well, there's only a 60 game season, so one player played more than 60 games.
Oh no, I don't know this answer. It's not Randy Razorina.
It is not Randy the Razorina.
I know. That was like obviously what we were talking about, but it had to be someone who got traded on like an off day. Obviously, that's what it was because he had to play for 2 teams because they only played 60.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely couldn't have been a guy who got traded to the Cardinals because the Cardinals only played 58 games. Dude, I got nothing. I mean,
Starling Marte. He was traded to the Marlins. The Marlins had a whole bunch of doubleheader games late in the season, so he ended up playing 61 games this year.
Yeah, that's right.
And then getting hurt and not playing in the playoffs. Oh, you hate to see it, but I'm excited for that guy. I like Starling Marte and all his PED use. He can use more of them and just not get caught for all I care. Did you happen to see? I saw this on Twitter the other day that Aubrey Huff basically low-key admitted he used steroids. And never got
Aubrey Huff is a psychopath, and anyone who follows him on Twitter for real because they believe what he says is an idiot.
I don't follow him. I saw someone screenshot it and then say, so basically he said that I think he said something along the lines of we should just put testosterone in all of our vaccines in all our vaccines to make everyone stronger. And basically, he basically said that he got away with it his entire career. So
that guy might be the biggest idiot on Twitter, which is a hell of a competition.
I do wonder if a guy like him is one of those guys that like really didn't do much in the major leagues because he really only had a couple like decent seasons, and he like can't get out of this idea that he hasn't been in the limelight long enough. So he's like, I'm just gonna be a complete D-bag on Twitter so people pay attention to me and I can have my time to shine again.
I don't want to give it Aubrey Huff any more than what I just said. That guy is a total idiot.
That sounds perfectly fine with me as we end the baseball segment here on the Last Inning Touchdown.